Hey Pioneers, welcome to episode number 436. Today's episode is a fun one. We are talking about herbal drinks, elixirs, cocktails, and mocktails. But what's really fun is we are looking at them for flavor profiles, medicinal purposes, as well as some ways to preserve fruit, also to make these based upon what you have available to you in your garden and foraging in your area. So it kind of brings together a lot of my favorite topics into one episode. I think you're really going to enjoy this one. So our guest for today is Laura Gilmour, and Laura is a forager, herbalist, and business owner living near Dwight, Ontario. Her rural upbringing allowed her to develop a natural curiosity and passion for nature from a young age. Laura formerly studied ecology and later went on to pursue sustainable living by apprenticing on several permaculture farms and studying with a number of herbalists. Laura has a passion for naturalist studies, homesteading, and traditional living skills that connect us to our food and the land in the most human of ways. Laura runs Wildmuskokaon Botanicals, which produces artisan wild foods and cocktail products. You also might recall that name because her husband, Chris, has been on here a couple of times, and we have been sharing about mushrooms, and we will make sure in the blog post that accompanies this episode, which you can find at melissanorris.com/436, because this is episode number 436. We will link to those if you want to check out those episodes as well. But Wildmuskokaon Botanicals exists to reconnect people with the natural world and to promote wellness and fun by incorporating wild plants back into people's modern lives. She also teaches foraging and herbal medicine classes in the Muskoka area from a relationship-based perspective. So we are very excited to have Laura on the podcast. Without further ado, well, Laura, welcome to the Pioneering Today podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, me too. It's funny because your husband, Chris, we've actually done several different things together. And so I feel like I should know you, but I'm like, this is actually our first time, you and I, getting to talk. So I'm super excited to have you.
Yeah. And it's always great to connect with people that, I've watched a lot of your videos and gone to you for a few resources. So it's always great to connect in this way with people that, provide lots of good information.
Yeah, awesome. Well, I am excited about today because one of the things in summertime, but really all throughout the year, at least in my own health journey, beverages have played a big part of that, more so on the not healthy side. So I used to be I cringe to say it, but I used to be a Diet Coke die-hard girl. I mean, like even in my teen years, my mom always drank diet soda when we did have soda. It wasn't a huge part. It was later on when I became a teen where my mom would have diet sodas, and it was kind of like this treat. But because she drank diet soda, and then by the time I was a teenager, I kind of just picked that habit up. And so that was in my late teen years, and in my 20s, I drank a lot of Diet Coke. And as one can imagine, the carbonation, the food dyes, the aspartame, like all that, it just makes me like literally cringe now. Really did cause it was a contributing factor in a large part to a lot of the health issues that I had with ulcers and damage to my esophagus and upper stomach. So I quit cold turkey, and I have never went back to drinking any type of soda or pop. And now it's been over a decade. And I did a lot of other healing things, but I know that it's a really big thing for people is finding a beverage. Like a lot of times they'll switch over their diet as far as food goes, but finding a beverage, people are like, well, I get tired of just drinking water. Like, they want something else. And used to be historically, herbal drinks were something that was much more commonplace, just because one, they didn't have the options that we do now, but for flavoring as well as medicinal properties. And I feel like that's a larger portion of that has been lost, at least within my own context and seeing with people. Like you have a lot of people who know sourdough or know some of these other things, but the herb drinking, or herb drinking, that could be something fun. Using herbs in beverages, I feel like it's a little bit more of a lost art. So I'm really excited for that. So let's just kind of lay some groundwork on what the difference between cocktails, mocktails, herbal drinks, and elixirs are. Like, are there exact definitions that make those a little bit different? Is there some overlap? That type of thing.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes those words are interchanged. But so cocktail really comes from, it's often an alcoholic drink. And cocktails tend to be these really, beautiful drinks and fancy glasses that are made with complex liqueurs and bittering agents and then our distilled alcohol. And I'm someone who came from an herbalist background. So I was really interested in working with plants, working with herbs, but from an herbalist perspective, when we make tinctures, we make teas, maybe you try to make them taste good, but a lot of time we're looking mainly to formulate around actions instead of flavor and experience. And something that I learned when I started to like dabble in the bartending cocktail mixology world was that those fancy cocktails often have, they're meant for the alcohol, but there's also like these layers of flavor. Your garnishing is all meant to like increase, enhance your experience with the drink. And there's like this really elevated art, and hence why there's, cocktail bars in cities where people will spend $40 on a cocktail. Um, as we know, there are some health issues around consumption of alcohol. A lot of people are moving away from consuming alcohol, but they still want to have the experience of having like really lovely flavored complex drinks. And so I think that's where mocktails kind of comes in. It's this idea of creating a drink that might have the same depth of flavor, that's, garnished really beautifully, that you put in a pretty glass, where you can have the experience of something really special, but it doesn't have to include the alcohol. So that's where I think the mocktail world kind of comes in. And then when we get into the ideas like herbal elixirs, that might be maybe making something like an herbal tincture or like something like often elixir is like an alcohol base, like your tincture, but then maybe you add honey. And so you're still looking at something for herbal action, but you're maybe crafting it to have a little bit more of a delicious flavor. Something in the sense that you could add that to, bubbly water or to teas and make them taste really good. I think when you get into the realm of herbal elixirs, it's like we want medicinal action, but we also want to enjoy taking the medicine. We want to actually use herbs and not just think of like, oh, it's this really strong medicine that I just need to like chug back. But how can we actually make the experience of, taking these herbs joyful and fun and yeah, taste really good.
Okay, I love that because I gotta be honest, I have never had a tincture where I'm like, I want to sip on this for a while. Like tinctures
Mhm.
usually are very very pungent, very strong. Some of that, of course, is from the alcohol, some of it is from the herbs that are in it. But yeah, so I love the idea of, especially because with my kids are teenagers now, but even me getting them to take the tinctures, like if they're really feeling sick, then they're like, yeah, because I want to get over this and I know that this is going to help me. And so they'll do it. But if it's just kind of more of that, where it's maybe a general health thing, or they're not really in that, distressed of full on symptoms, even as teenagers, I still have a hard time getting them to take tinctures. So I love the idea of the elixir where you can marry it so you're getting the health benefits, but it also is that enjoyable experience.
Mhm.
So, for the benefits of the elixirs and the herbal drinks, is there a way to ensure that we're really like, are they as strong as a tincture as far as medicinal properties? Are you kind of pulling that back a little bit and it would be more as like a herbal tea as far as therapeutic strength?
Yeah, I mean, if you're taking, like, you can put full dose tinctures essentially into your drinks. Bitters are an interesting class of herbs, 'cause they're meant to taste bitter, and there's a lot of really good properties that you get from actually tasting bitter. But what's interesting is what's called the bitters formula is not just bitter herbs. It's often bitter herbs like dandelion, yellow dock, gentian, but then it's combined with aromatic herbs. So things like lemon balm or cinnamon and ginger, and then often a touch of sweet to help round it out. And I can do a bitters and water before I eat. And you do have to taste a little bit of the bitter to get that flavor or to get the actions. But it's you round it out in a way that you can enjoy it. Like I do one that's a spiced maple one, so it has some maple syrup, it's got cardamom, it's got a sarsaparilla root, which is a wild plant that grows in our area.
Yeah.
Real root berry notes. Um, and there is that hint of the bitter, and that's kind of what you need to stimulate your digestion. But it's the idea that tastes good. But I'm taking, when I put that in water, I'm still taking the full medicinal dose. But I think the difference is we work with herbs that are considered more tonic herbs. So herbs that are meant to be taken regularly over time to help kind of build health and vitality. And then there are very strong herbs, things like echinacea or wormwood that are really like herbs. Golden seal would be examples of herbs that we'd save, and you take those and maybe, stronger doses when you have like a particular infection. And so I think the big difference is we're still taking full doses of herbs, but we're working with herbs that are classified as tonics, not as what herbs that we would put in a category where you'd use them for more like acute infections.
That's a
But yeah,
really
and
yeah, that's a
mhm,
good way of looking at that. The tonic part for your
mhm,
herbal drinks and elixirs versus the acute part.
mhm.
I like that. Um, with the bitters, um, with dandelion specifically, the bitter action, is that more from the leaves, or is there also bitter action with the roots?
The root is actually the primary bitter, but the leaves absolutely have it. So I use in the bitters formulas that I make, I use dandelion pretty much almost every formula. But I have one formula that I crafted. I call it the citrus roots, and it's like a dandelion and lemon together, but I use all parts of the dandelion. I use the leaf, I use the root, and you get more stronger action from the root, but the leaf you definitely still get bittering agent. I mean, that's why it's good to eat greens. Like the idea of eating a salad before your meal came from the idea that like your greens should have a little bit of bitterness, but the root has far more bitterness.
Okay, great. I know flavor wise, I have to say, when I've
Hmm.
harvested too late in the season, you really get that bitter, like, woo. And so, I guess I haven't really thought of the dandelion root so much when I've used it as the bitter. Probably just because the flavor profile for me has always been the leaves when I've, harvested them or it's been really dry. I've noticed too, if we get a lot of
Yeah.
heat, then those leaves really, that flavor becomes much more pronounced, and it's definitely that bitter, like make a face. So, okay, thank you
Hmm.
for that distinction. I hadn't done much of
Yeah.
studying on the root dandelion for bitter properties as the leaves. So that's good to know.
Yeah,
Um,
that's why when making making elixir, making a tincture of it, because bitter herbs are pretty hard to take, being able to take them in a tincture form as just a few drops, especially when you can kind of mask it, is a lot easier than just like munching on some dandelion roots.
yes, amen. Um, so within our definitions here, let's talk a little bit because I hear a lot of people talking about shrubs. So how does shrubs play into making these drinks? Are herbal versions? Let's like kind of dive into that world a little bit.
Yeah, yeah, it's a confusing word, the term shrub, because often, especially when you're dealing with like land-based people, they're like, what? Like a bush? Like, what are you
Yeah.
talking about? So the term actually it's derived from this Arabic term shrab, meaning to drink. And what a shrub is, it's an old colonial style food preservation. And so what you would do is you take your fruit that was like again, when people are homes that you have, especially when you grow fruit, you end up with like a whole bunch of something. And or you'll have the stuff that's kind of like what you'd never see for sale. It's like the B grade stuff, like the peaches with a little bit of bruising, or the strawberries. I noticed this when I pick strawberries. Most people that go out, they don't know how to pick a really ripe strawberry. We're used to seeing unripe fruit. So you want the really ripe stuff, this stuff that's super juicy. So I'll get the strawberries that are like really dark that'll almost bruise right away.
Yeah.
And what it is the fruit that's super ripe. And then you combine that with equal parts sugar, and you kind of need it. It doesn't work. You can do oxymels, which are similar to shrubs, which are done with honey, but there's cane sugar, as you know from someone who does a lot of preservation, there's a specific action in sugar that you can't really replicate with some other natural sugars because of the water
Yes.
content.
Yeah.
So with sugar being hydrophilic, meaning it draws moisture out of things, it will pull the moisture out of the fruit, and then you end up with the syrup. And then what you do is you actually then, so then you'd say have, generally you can kind of do it in parts. So it's like equal parts by volume, fruit and sugar. And then you'll end up with a syrup. And then you just drain the fruit mass off. And then you take your syrup and it's equal parts apple cider vinegar.
Okay.
And then you preserve that. And it's basically shelf stable, preserved. Um, but what's interesting about it is because you've added the apple cider vinegar and you get that acidity,
Hmm.
you get something that doesn't just taste like jam, that's sickeningly sweet. You actually have something that is kind of like if people like the tang of like kombucha, but don't want like the carbonation stuff. You get that like tang, and then you get all the health benefits of apple cider vinegar. And what I do, I even infuse the apple cider vinegar with different herbs. So we do a lot of wild crafting. So we do spruce tips and we do sumac, but like you can take the health properties of like other delicious herbs, like a rosemary infused, apple cider vinegar combined with like cherries or like, you can really play with what's in your garden. And then
Yeah.
what fruits, like in our region, like we're not a stone fruit region. We have a lot of berries and cranberries. So I do like a spruce tip infused vinegar, which is really bright and lemony. And then we get local cranberries and we do this one that's like cranberry and like lemony spruce vinegar. And it's so fun at the holidays. We do a strawberry and sumac, which is like basically like strawberry lemonade flavor.
Oh,
And so we're just kind of like working with the flavors of our like region of your own garden. Like, what's
yeah.
your abundance? People that grow black currants, and you're like, I can only eat so much black currant jelly, jam, you know, the bushes are maybe going on. So you can like play with black currants and then you can do different vinegars too. You can do like balsamic vinegar. You can really play, especially knowing that there's just these like you have these basic measurements and
Yeah.
then you can play from there. And from a health benefits perspective, you get something that like syrups, like people will get these like soda stream machines or things and then they're like, oh, I'm trying to be healthier, but then they use like artificial, like you spoke to the health benefits or not health benefits of all these like artificial sweeteners, things that are saying like natural flavor or like not natural flavor. They use a
No.
lot of solvents to make what's called like natural flavor.
Yeah.
um you want to start with like real plants, like real fruit, real herbs, and then these extracts, these shrub extracts, because they have the apple cider vinegar and the whole fruit and a bit of sugar, the best drinks for when out hot gardening days. Like it's like your more natural version of like Gatorade. Like the amount of like nutrients, and then just like I'll come in from a hot gardening day, super sweaty, and like nothing is as refreshing as like a cold shrub, like on ice. Like it's yeah. And so yeah, and we can just work with like what's abundant in our gardens.
Yeah, I love it. We always have a ton of blackberries because they grow wild here. They're actually a noxious sweet. They're
Mm.
not native, but so and blackberries, just because there's such an abundance of them, and mint because mint just loves our climate. I'm thinking a blackberry mint would be really fun. I do have a question
Mm.
though, because I have made my own homemade fruit vinegars a
Mm.
lot, but I've never taken a finished vinegar and then introduced sugar content to it. Does it then go through another fermentation stage? Like, does it get hoochy because you're not, it's already finished? Like, I'm curious about that. Does it continue to ferment? I think is what I'm asking.
It will grow. Like, I mean, when I'm making shrubs for myself for fun,
Yeah.
I won't pasteurize the vinegar, but I do sell like shrubs. And because we're bottling them, I do tend to pasteurize the vinegar just a bit because otherwise they will definitely grow. And so if you
Okay.
know that the sugar's gonna like kick it up a bit,
Yeah.
yeah, just know that you can get definitely some activity in the bottle,
Okay.
which can be really good for gut health, but in your bottle you might just want to know that. And so yeah, when I do them for sale, I do like a pasteurization, so you're still getting the nutrient value, the mineral value of the vinegar, but you're not getting the live culture.
Okay, great. So if you don't pasteurize it for home use, I'm assuming
Mm.
following the rules of regular fermentation, you may need to burp the jar if it gets too much. Like just kind of keep an eye on the carbonation level and
Yeah.
release it so that it doesn't explode if need be.
Yeah.
Okay. Uh, Okay, I'm intrigued by the shrubs. Like I said, I've made vinegar and I've definitely done sugar with fruit to pull it out, especially for jelly making and jam
Yeah.
making, but I've never put the two together. So I'm like, ooh, I know what I'm doing for my summer project. Like super fun.
Yeah, and it's really fun. Like often like it's almost like a day or two to even make it, you know. Like I really love the process of putting like starting that process with the sugar and the fruit and watching the juices come out. And then once you kind of have your recipe dialed, I'll often know like I can start to add a bit of the vinegar. And I do this trick where once you strain the fruit off the sugar,
Yeah.
instead of just adding the vinegar straight to the syrup, I throw the vinegar on the fruit. And it's almost like you're washing, and then I really mix it up. It's
Yeah.
like you're washing the fruit. And then the funny thing is, by the time I'm done, I know I've made a good shrub. If in the end, the fruit, like, because often, like, I remember at first when I started making it, like, oh, there's these like whole strawberries. Like, what a waste. I'm going to make like fruit leather from them. And we made like fruit leather, and it tasted like nothing. Like, because
Oh,
you've actually done such a good job
extracted all
of
of the, yeah.
extracting out the flavor and the juices that like they don't taste like anything. And I kind of enjoy the process of taking my time and like really getting all the flavor out, you know, really washing the berries with the vinegar, really like I'll let it drain overnight so it's like you get all the juices and flavor to the
Yeah.
point that my chickens often like I'll bring them the
I was gonna,
leftover fruit now and they're just like they're not even totally into it where like,
well,
how often do you give chickens like a whole bunch of strawberries and they're just like not interested?
okay, you know you have done a bang up job on extraction if even the chickens are like, no. Because when I make elderberry syrup, I'll take out the leftover
Mhm.
spices and the spent berries and give them to the chickens. And they're usually pretty good about like they'll still go through and eat those. So that's pretty funny though that you found something that chickens are even like, not much there for me.
Yeah, yeah,
Awesome. Okay, I got us kind of sidetracked on shrubs, but I got very excited
yeah,
about that. So for making our homemade herbal drinks, let's talk about kind of supplies for making our elixirs. I know we've talked about obviously having, vinegar, sugar, and fruit for shrubs, but kind of what are some of your essential supplies just to make the process easy? And I'm assuming a lot of this is already things that most kitchens probably already have on hand, but is there any special little things just to be aware of or how to use them?
yeah. So yeah, we talked about making shrubs. You can also make so simple syrups are like a really common thing in like cocktails. People use a simple syrup, which is basically just like uh sugar 1 to 1 with water. But I make a lot of herbal syrups this way. So,
Okay.
because I'm like, okay, if a drink has simple syrup, I'm like, well, I want to make like I'll make a strong herbal tea and then make my simple syrup from that. And that you can play with hundreds of different flavors that way. Um, so yeah, your kitchen ingredients. You want so some let's say some bitters. So some different bitters, either that you make yourself, or that you purchase, different flavors. Um, because they're what's really going to add the complexity to the drink. I was taught that bitters are like the salt and pepper. So they're what really helps to like
Oh,
bring things together because it's like you
yeah,
could just make a really simple soda, but it's like adding the bitters to that is like, oh, I've seasoned my drink. And we wouldn't think about not seasoning our food. And
right.
so it's like to add more flavor. Um, and then some fun garnishes, like thinking about like the fresh herbs from around your garden. So whether it's just pretty or there's this like again, there's muddling herbs, which is like if people that do like a mojito, it's like a
Yeah.
classic
Yeah.
technique. Again, we would never often people just think, oh, it's a cocktail thing, but like to take some fresh herbs and put them in the bottom of your glass and like mash it up is like a way to help break down the aromatics and then you build your drink on that. So it's like I just, in your garden, like even though I have a big vegetable garden, I still keep a few pots of like tea herbs on my front
Mhm.
porch because they're just easy to grab, you know,
Yeah, I love
when
that.
I'm doing things. Mhm. And then
Okay. Mm. So what are your tea herbs that you keep in your
oh,
pots?
so well I got like a mint, like I mean it's a pretty standard one. Lemon balm, I do holy basil or tulsi
Oh, yeah.
right there. So lovely. I like, a few different kinds of basil. So like a regular, like Geneva's green basil, nice purple basil, um, different times I like to keep around. Yeah, and then the flower garden kind of expands. Like this time of year, I'm drinking lots of elderflower, and the bee balm is just coming into full bloom, and those guys are amazing. Rose petals muddled in a glass is glorious. Yeah.
Yeah, I love Tulsi. In fact, it's funny. I actually like Tulsi like in like green salads in place of like I don't
Mhm.
even grab like the regular basil. I'll just grab the Tulsi and just do a quick like rough chop and throw that on top of green salads, and it's one of my favorite flavor profiles. Yeah.
Yeah, fresh Tulsi, there's nothing like it. And even when you dry it, it's like it's such a summer thing because there's nothing like fresh Tulsi. So yeah, that was when I do a lot. I've been doing a lot of iced teas. So again, just making your like herbal tea and then chilling it. And then yeah, lemon balm Tulsi iced teas like in this heat wave. Ooh, it's been really nice.
Ooh,
Um and
yeah.
then yeah, it's so being an herbalist first, I kind of came into like mixology later and I love all the fun kitchen tools, in the bartending world. You can get all these like fancy, um,
Oh yeah, the yes, like
mixers and
yeah.
like they call this so like the cocktail mixer, they call this a jigger, so for people who love tools, like you can get in and find all that fun stuff. And I've actually found quite a bit at thrift stores and stuff too, like once you have an eye for it. But I kind of laugh. I often call myself the mason jar mixologist because it's like my favorite. Like you can have one of those fancy mixers, but honestly, a lot of the time I just take my mason jar, like a 500 ml if I'm doing one drink, and put the ice in. And the idea is that there's this idea in mixology, and it really makes a huge difference when you're making the drink if you chill all the ingredients first.
Okay.
So as opposed to building it in the glass on ice. And
Hmm.
I've tried it. It was like, again, in this kind of like bartending, artisan bartending class I did, they were explaining like but it really makes a difference. So what I'll do is I'll grab my mason jar, throw a bunch of ice in it, add my, say, shrub, add some bitters, add some like actual fresh herbs, and like you shake it, like you do the fun little cocktail shake thing with your lid on. You can do it with the shaker too, but you can do it with a mason jar. And then I'll give it a really good shake. Um, if you do spirits or alcohol or whatever, you can add that in too. But then like you give everything a really, really good shake. You're aerating the drink as well, which actually like lightens the whole thing up. And yeah, put it in a glass with a lemon slice and maybe top with a bit of water or bubbly water
Ooh,
and it's
fun.
like that's that technique. Yeah. So like there's the tools, but there is a few like technique pieces that will like kind of change the way. Like I definitely notice sometimes my husband will be like he'll go to like build a drink for himself. And he's often like, "Can you do it?" Because like when you do it, it's just different when I do it. Because he just tries to take his, glass and put the ice in and build the drink on top. I'm like, no, no, you gotta like you actually kind of need to shake or you need to pre-chill the ingredients before you put it like in the finished glass. And there's all these funny things too. You can do like you can smoke glasses and you can rub like if you make herbal sugars or salts,
Hmm.
you can like rub half lemon along the edge of the glass and then dip it into your like herbal sugar or herbal salt.
Oh,
And then now you have rimmed your glass.
I
And so you
like
can add,
that. I do a
yeah.
lot of I do a lot of basil salt actually because to your point,
Mm,
dehydrated basil loses its flavor. Like it
mhm,
just doesn't have the same. But I found that
exactly.
doing salt basil, and then storing it in the fridge so that I have a higher ratio of basil to salt,
Mhm.
that tends to keep its flavor. But I never thought about rimming a glass with it. So that's kind of fun.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's pretty fun. Like and you can do kind of we call them Caesars. I think they're called Bloody Marys down in the States. Like those are really popular kind of drinks. And you can do fun mocktail versions of them. Do you know it's like a it's kind of like it's like a vegetable almost cocktail. I think of it's like a tomato
Yeah.
juice based kind of drink. And you often garnish it with like lots of pickled things and it's like a salty rim.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, it's a whole thing in Canada, and often it's like what you would drink at brunch.
Mhm.
Um, but yeah, that basil salt would be perfect on a Caesar or
Yeah.
Bloody Mary. Hmm.
In fact,
Or
it's funny.
the
I was just gonna say, I haven't tried the Tulsi as a basil salt. I've just done regular
mm,
basil, but now I'm like, "Hmm, I might have to play with that this summer. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's beautiful as a sugar. I'll do the same process, but you can't let it just air dry when you do the sugar because of the action of pulling out the water. So
Right.
I'll do the same process where you just like grind the herb with,
With
say,
the
sugar
sugar.
instead of salt, and then I throw it in the dehydrator. And then,
Okay.
yeah.
And then
And
dehydrate.
then, yeah,
Okay.
rimming the glass. That's how I'll make a lot of different like herbal sugars. Mhm.
Yeah, that's actually I am thinking the mint with the sugar would be really good. Yeah, okay, I'm just like starting to salivate. I'm like,
So I know so many ways. And again, it's like, again, learning some techniques. It really, I remember when I kind of got like opened up to this idea of like that there's all these fun techniques and different approaches to working with herbs and for fun drinks. So just like opened up even looking around my property in my garden and be like, oh, there's some different ways that I can look at this, or different ways I can look at some of what I always considered as medicine plants and
yeah,
start to play with the idea of them for flavor
yeah.
and yeah, experience.
Okay. Awesome. So when kind of like a framework, if you will, because we've talked about like having a, having a bitter, having kind of these different um flavor
Hmm.
aspects so that, they build on one another. Like are there specific ingredients that really work best, or is there like basically like a framework, like choose a base, these are your bases, and then a flavor and then a herb, or am I making sense?
Yeah, no, no. I mean, it's really similar to when we're cooking. And so I think again, when people first getting started, that idea of pairing like maybe like try to not call it kitchen sink, throw everything in. And so it's like pick a fruit, so say we're starting with like shrub, so you mentioned your blackberries, and it's like, okay, great, we're gonna like use this blackberries. You want acidity in a drink. So if you're using a shrub, it has that vinegar in it. So that kind of covers our acidity. But if let's say you'd made a Tulsi simple syrup and you were going to choose like blackberry Tulsi, you could do like some fresh muddled blackberries in the bottom with some Tulsi syrup, but you'd want to add some acidity. So that's where lemons or limes, or again, like come into play as someone who, like, I'm really working on like what's regional, like acidity. So I've been playing with sumac a lot, like trying to figure out all different ways that I can work with like acidity from sumac, just because it was what grows regionally. And but yeah, so something sweet balanced with something acidic, and then the bitters, and with something like bitters, you're only adding like a few drops, and they're working just as your like seasoning agent. Or I make a bitters that's a smoky cedar, and there are some times where like this idea of adding a layer of kind of like smokiness brings something out that's really aromatic. Like we do sometimes a drink, it's called a dark and stormy, which is made with like a really dark spiced rum and like ginger beer. So it's really like very strong spice. But when you add this layer of smokiness, it like kind of just grounds things and like balances it out. Um, but
Okay,
very much like cooking.
how do you smoke it? Like, literally, like, on a smoker, or I've seen where people, like, light it, like, they trap it in the glass and the smoke kinda, like, swirls around the glass and then they take it out, like, kinda
Yeah,
walk. Yeah.
yeah, so it's a cedar tincture. So it's an alcohol, like it's a tincture. It's like herbs soaked in alcohol. But what
Okay.
I do is I harvest the fresh cedar and we burn a campfire, and I like burn the cedar over the fire, and
Okay.
I'll burn sections of the branches, and then I like put them in the jar, and then they get covered with the alcohol, and then it traps this like
The smoky flavor
woodsy
translates,
smoky flavor.
pulls
Yeah.
out. Alright. Well, there we
Yeah.
go.
It's like it's a fun thing to layer in sometimes in certain drinks. But I kind of say like don't, pick a few ingredients, like, two or three herbs, fruits, and then just remembering that if something isn't balanced right, like check with your acidity. So that's where like sometimes adding a little bit of lemon or lime might kind of change it up. But there's no real hard fast rules. And will tell people if they're interested in like playing around with different kind of ideas, like you can always go to like find like a cocktail recipe book or online and just think about like, especially when you see something like simple syrup, or you can just switch. You think, oh, this is just plain simple syrup, maybe I can add an herbal flavor in there.
Okay.
And then a lot of times, like, figuring out like either you can take the alcohol out, or there's lots of really cool like distilleries that are making these like non-alcoholic alcohols. Um, I mean, I don't really use a lot of those. I tend to just like to use things like shrubs and bitters just to like provide that complexity that maybe the alcohol would. Mhm.
Yeah.
But yeah, choose just a few ingredients, and then yeah, think about making sure you're playing with acidity there. And, and then mixes. I like you can just I have a soda stream just so that I can just use like my own water. I'm not buying bottled water or canned water. But if you don't do bubbly water, that's also fine. Like just whatever your local water is. Yeah, I think
Okay.
it's just really assessing like what's in your garden, what's in your local area, what fruit abundance is in your region, and then just kind of like baking in some ways, thinking about what flavors might taste good together, but don't overdo it. I think that's the biggest thing for people that are just getting started is just pick a few flavors. But blueberry basil, that's an awesome, very good combination.
That would be really good. Yeah, my blueberries, about a week, the majority of them will be starting to come on, right? Like there's just a couple of those really early ones that have like 2 berries per plant that are starting to turn blue. So that would
Yeah,
be fun. Yeah.
the wild
Uh,
blueberries are coming on, and our cultivated ones are just behind.
yeah. So can you use dried fruit or herbs? I mean, for the muddling, I'm like, you could reconstitute them, but I feel like fresh is probably best, or is that just a misconception?
Yeah, I mean, I'm definitely more of like I love working with the fresh herbs, but I'm also like the kind of person like I live in a place where there's 6 months of winter. So working with
Yeah.
dried things is I mean, that is a reason though that I will like to make things like the shrubs or infused vinegars, again, the salts and sugars and stuff when they're fresh, because it's preserving. Like you know as well as I do the value of preservation methods. Um,
Yes.
so certain things you can get away with. Now for muddling, not so much. I have reconstituted dried herbs that are really aromatic and made like sugars before. Like I've taken dried lavender and like soaked it a little bit and made like a lavender sugar with it. You can absolutely still do different syrups and then teas. Like, like again, thinking of you make a herbal tea and then you just like can chill it. Or in the winter time, like I do a lot of kind of like I will again look at my herbal tea, but then I'll add like a little bit of bitters, or I'll do the like nice sugar rim on a warm tea, and that's like seasonally kind of a way that I'll approach it. It's just like how do we play with like warm drinks? Like a nice lemon slice with like if you've probably made fire cider before.
Oh yeah.
Um, so we do fire cider hot toddies with like a nice lemon slice and the fire cider. And sometimes I'll have like a little like cayenne pepper salt that I'll do like a half rim of.
Ooh.
And if you're like feeling a little under the weather, like a little fire cider hot toddy is like really nice. Hmm.
That would definitely fire you up. Like, I
Mhm.
guess you would be warm all over.
Yeah, you're like a little, sometimes you go for the Tylenol for a little pain relief. Sometimes you go for like a little half shot of whiskey or tequila and to just like take the edge off the body aches.
Okay, so
Don't mix the two.
yeah, yeah. One or the other. Your liver will be much happier if it's not
Yeah,
both.
yeah,
Um,
not both.
yeah, not both. Um, in regards to mint, because I know when my acid reflux, when I was still kind of in that healing phase, that
Hmm.
mint would very much trigger that because it would relax that muscle, and I would get a lot more reflux. So just knowing that that's something I've struggled with, and I know a lot of times it seems like mint is something that we see a lot used in different mocktails and that type of thing. Is there another like good substitute if you're following a recipe, or you're like, oh man, like I've had this drink in the past with mint, I'd like to recreate it, but mint seems to be giving me some problems. Do you have like some favorite other herbal substitutes for mint?
Yeah, I mean, a number of them still are in the greater family of mint because that is a family of plants. The
Yeah.
opposite stem, the opposite leaves, square stems, aromatic. Um, so if you have like a full-on allergy to the that Lamiaceae family, avoid them. But things like bee balm and lemon balm are actually like still in that category, but I don't find they're quite as carminative. Like they don't quite open things up quite as much. Um, so though, yeah, bee balm is one that I really like. Or again, just going for something like basil, rosemary, thyme. You can even like go completely different group of family, just thinking about our culinary herbs and just playing with flavors that way.
Okay, awesome. You know, it's funny. I actually got last year a lime lemon balm.
Hmm.
I'm like, that one could be very fun. Um,
Mm.
yeah, I love lemon balm regardless, but the lime one was really, really fun. I have to test and see if they've crossed flavors at all because I know I've had that with mint where if it was too close planted to another variety, they tend to just end up being one flavor over time. Yeah. So I love the lemon balm. Okay, so to wrap it up, what is if you had to pick one for summer, like what is your favorite herbal drink? And then like break down ingredients for us.
Okay. Um, I mean, I'm such a seasonal person, but these days I mean, I'm so into blueberry. So like we do blueberry and spruce shrub. So you get this like again lemony notes from the infused vinegar, so nice blueberries. And then I will make I call it the wild a campfire smoky mojito, blueberry mojito. So it's the I'll muddle mint, or I actually really love muddling the Tulsi. I'll
Okay.
muddle, so take my glass and I'll like muddle, so which just means you're kind of breaking up the Tulsi in the bottom of the glass, or it's the bottom of my mason jar. So my mason jar, I'm muddling it, throw in a bunch of ice. I throw my like 2 tablespoons, whatever, 3/4 of an ounce of my blueberry spruce shrub. Um, I most times just like that, maybe a splash of lime, but if I don't have it, I don't have it. Give it a really good shake, and then I pour that into another mason jar, top with a bit of bubbly water, and then I add the smoky cedar bitters on top.
Oh,
Um, and maybe just like a little sprig of the Tulsi on the side just to make it look cute. And then so when you go to sip the drink, you smell the smoky notes and the like aromatic Tulsi, but then you get this like refreshing blueberry hit. But like at the peak of summer, oh, that's a good one.
okay, I
Yeah.
totally have to try this smoking technique with this cedar. I'm very intrigued by that flavor profile. And like for summer,
Yeah.
like, you know, campfires and smoke, like that feels like a really fun, like bringing it all together in a beverage. So, okay. Well, this has been fun. Like there are so many combinations. You've definitely got my mind like, ooh. And I kind of love that there's another use for the fruit when it definitely that hits that overripe. It's kind of like those seconds where it's
Mhm.
not necessarily something that you're gonna, you know, want to maybe eat fresh. You know, it's just not at like its peak, but
Yeah.
it's super sugary concentrated at that point.
Yeah.
So I always love having options for when you've got that stuff. You're gonna look like, I'm not quite sure what I want to do. This is like that perfect opportunity. So yay. Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Laura. So for those who are wanting to go learn more about you, find out more about what you guys are doing, what's the best place for folks to connect with you?
Yeah, so our business is called Wild Muskoka. So you can find us at wildmuskoka.com, at Wild Muskoka on Instagram and YouTube. Put out lots of different fun foraging resources, and we ship products, all over. So yeah, you can either, if you're in the Ontario area, I'd lead foraging walks, and if otherwise, you can order our products and just follow us online.
Okay, great. We'll have a link to that too in the blog post that accompanies this. So
Great.
thank you so
Yeah.
much. This was so much fun.
It's so great to talk to you. Yeah, I love talking about summer drinks.
Well, I hope that you enjoyed that episode as much as I did. Is anybody else as excited to try the shrubs as me? I'm actually a little surprised. I'm like, I can't believe I haven't actually made a true shrub before. I've done all kinds of fruit vinegar. And again, in today's blog post, we'll link to it beneath this video if you're watching this on YouTube, or if you're listening to it on the podcast, you can go to melissanorris.com/436. We will link to some tutorials and recipes that I have if you want to learn how to make your own vinegar as the first step of making homemade shrubs. And one of the other things I wanted to touch on just briefly, because Laura and I were chatting about it after we stopped recording the episode, as luck would have it. So I told her I would make sure that I got it in. And that is when we were talking about liver support especially if you are deciding to make a drink that has alcohol in it. Of course, alcohol is processed through the liver and can obviously be very hard on the liver. And bitters are a natural way that does help to support liver and good liver function. So especially if you are going to be making a cocktail version of some of these, the inclusion of bitters helps your liver. Or if you're just doing a herbal mocktail version, the non-alcoholic version, bitters also helps to support the liver. I've been sharing on some previous episodes, if you didn't catch those, on my health journey and detoxing from some overload of some different toxin levels. So liver support has been something that I have very much been paying attention to and implementing. So there you go. Bitters will help you on that as well. Okay, friends, thank you so much for joining me on this episode. I will be back here with you next week. Blessings and mason jars for now.